My name is Ryan Britt, this is Singularity Co. This is the Lust for Genre reading series. The concept of this reading series is comedians, personalities, writers, and all sorts of smart people reading their favorite genre fiction. By that, we mean science fiction, fantasy. Sometimes it's meant Western, sometimes it's meant mobster erotica. Sometimes it's involved Victorian pornography. Anything that is not regular literature, that is genre literature, we read here. This goes along with Singularity Co.'s mission, which is to save the sci-fi. Singularity Co. buys up collections of old, clunky paperbacks and sci-fi and fantasy and stuff that's often out of print. Old genre books that are out of print, they put back into print as ebooks, so that's part of their mission. I am simply the host of this reading series where I invite people to come and share their favorite genre fiction from the past. Tonight we are going to have two storytellers joining you. The original lineup included three. An old storyteller friend of mine from Arizona was unable to make it because his plane was delayed. So you're going to have to settle for me telling a story at the beginning instead. But your performers tonight will include Michelle Onafrock and Kate Greathead, both prominent storytellers in New York City. And I'll introduce them a little bit more later. For now, I'll kick things off with talking about my first favorite book, which was a Star Trek paperback called Yesterday's Sun. It's by a woman named A.C. Crispin, whose full name is Anne Crispin. She actually passed away last year and was a prominent science fiction author. I'm going to hold on to that, actually. My favorite thing about Anne Crispin is her biography at the back of Yesterday's Sun. She was 33 when this came out in 1983. And she was a lifelong Star Trek fan. Now, Star Trek had only been around at that point since 1966. So at that point, we weren't even dealing with 20 years, and she was 33, meaning she was a Star Trek fan from the point that she was talking, I guess, when it was extremely unpopular and trying to be canceled by NBC. So if you read that kind of autobiography in the 90s as a kid, you know you're dealing with someone who's extremely hardcore. Nerds, as it turns out, have poor evolutionary adaptations when it comes to bullying. An opossum at least knows how to play possum. Nerds who are raised on science fiction and fantasy don't know often when to shut up when they're being teased. My experience with this was, anything from having the wrong bowl haircut or having a strange kind of gait to just actually genuinely being uncool. I got teased, and my response generally was something along the lines of, "There's no logic in teasing me." Obviously, this worked really well because playground bullies, as we all know, respond very well to assertions of logic. It's amazing how much worse we can make it for ourselves when we're that young. And I think that's part of the reason why people are so enamored with the character of Spock from the old Star Trek. Unlike a child, Spock has figured out the best way not to get his feelings hurt. He simply doesn't have any to begin with. Now, of course, this is a little bit of a cheat because he is from a race of people called the Vulcans who repress their emotions. So the money shot of any good Star Trek is when Spock loses it, right? This is always the moments that we enjoy as Star Trek fans. It's a character built up to completely lose his shit all the time. Everybody knows what slash fiction is here. Round of applause, perhaps. Slash fiction is when two characters are paired together in a way that was not originally intended. And this came from the idea of Kirk slash, the punctuation mark, Spock, meaning that there was an implied romantic sexual relationship between the two. And why not? Having a really passionate person like Kirk and having a really cold person like Spock made for much more exciting fan erotica. The problem is that a lot of it is really embedded in the text itself, and the fans, even if they were brand new fans like Anne Crispin in 1983, already knew that. Is that why I liked this when I was a kid? No. Why I liked it was because anytime Spock was doing anything other than just Star Trek stuff, but doing more like personal life stuff, like having friends and having a family, it made him more like what I experienced. This is the great thing about tie-in fiction, right? All this fiction that's written outside of these big universes gets to explore things that we wouldn't normally see on the TV show or the movie. And in Yesterday's Son, Spock has a son. He straight up has a kid that he did not know about. The most in control person in all of Star Trek has a kid that he didn't know about. How could that have happened when he's in control of himself all the time? Well, there was this great episode of the original series. All of these episodes had great titles. They were never Spock Gets Laid or anything like that. They were always euphemisms, and this one was All Our Yesterdays. And in All Our Yesterdays, the Enterprise rolls up on a planet called Sarpedon. Sarpedon has a huge real estate problem. Their sun is going nova. So nobody has anywhere to live anymore. They have to figure out where they're all going to go. We have seats up here if anybody wants to come sit. Hi, Brittany. The planet Sarpedon doesn't know where they're going to put all their people, so they figured out the ultimate solution to this real estate problem. They're going to send people back in time. That's going to be the deal. Kirk and Spock and Bones don't know this is going on. They're just trying to help out. They accidentally get set back into this planet's past. Spock and Bones roll up to an ice age where there is an extremely scantily clad nice person named Zarabeth. They couldn't have just named her Jill. Zarabeth was her name. And Spock suddenly realizes because he's in the past of an ancient planet that suddenly he's feeling more emotional. This is a pretty sorry excuse for Spock acting the way he does in this episode, but he blames it on the time travel. I imagine if any of us time traveled to the 1960s, we would immediately revert and start wearing, headscarves and bell bottoms. Like, I don't know where Spock was getting this excuse, but it's implied heavily in a later scene where he's pulling his clothes back on in a cave that he and Zarabeth got it on. 15 years later, and Crispin's like, I wonder if he had a kid with Zarabeth. Who cares if he left her in the past? No one cares. And Crispin cared. She wrote a book about Spock's bastard kid, whose name is Czar. Before this happens, how would you start a novel like that? Well, you'd start it with Captain Kirk watching a performance of HMS Pinafore with his friends. Kirk sat in the section of the wreck deck that had temporarily been converted into a theater, watching HMS Pinafore, but his attention wasn't on the stage. Tonight, his ship had docked at Starbase 11, and Spock was overdue. Oh, shit. Tomorrow morning at 0900, Starfleet technicians would swarm about for a 2-week inspection and repair detail. If Spock and he didn't get started within 24 hours, they couldn't make it halfway across the sector to the Guardian and back within the allotted time. The scheduled date to report for duty might find the Enterprise without her first officer and her captain. Essentially, they're going on a vacation together and they don't want anybody to know anything about it. And the reason is they found some clue in the history books that there's somebody billions of years ago, thousands of years ago, that looks exactly like Spock, and they want to know why. So they're going to go to the only time portal that they know about and go back in time while they have some time off. This is how these guys spend their vacation, tracking down their interdimensional bastard children. There's no money in the 23rd century, so hush money is completely out of the question here. Kirk's getting impatient. The audience around him has standed and applauded enthusiastically. The captain hastily joined them and watched Scotty dash backstage and drag a reluctant Uhura to take a bow. The crew roared when the chief engineer gave the chief communications officer a resounding kiss. All of these titles are in all caps. Among his cheering crew, he saw the person he'd been waiting for enter the wreck deck through one of the side entrances and stand searching the faces. Spock stood braced against the bulkhead as Kirk joined him as though his body might fall without the support. The normally impeccably groomed fringe of dark bangs was rumpled, and the face beneath looked more exhausted than last time the Kirk had seen the Vulcan. Now this implied he had seen him last time he was also exhausted. Why was he also exhausted? You look terrible. Where the hell have you been? What a great friend. Kirk began. and then interrupted himself, "We've got to hurry or we'll miss that supply shuttle. I've got our gear in my quarters. Are you all set on your end?" In Kirk's quarters, both officers changed into durable scouting coveralls together and packed their camping and cold weather gear into kits. I raided sickbay when McCoy was out last week and got a medical kit together. If this is a euphemism for drugs, I didn't catch it when I was a kid. They just go to get some pharmaceuticals they're not supposed to have. Should we bring phasers? Mine didn't work last time we were on Sarpedon. I investigated that and found that a Tabacron, this is a crap time portal that they can't use anymore, was set up to automatically negate the effectiveness of any weapon that passed through it. A precaution that it could keep their weapons right from not killing people, but it couldn't keep Spock from. Anyway, a precautionary measure to prevent someone from the future from ruling a past society. Our phasers will work this time. Good. I'd hate to depend on rocks and fists against some life forms I read about. You ready? The two officers headed for the turbolift carrying their kits. Kirk glanced at the Vulcan. What kept you? I was beginning to think you weren't going to make it back. I was forced to return aboard a robot freighter. There were no faster ships available. Great excuse in the 23rd century, the old robot freighter excuse. That's why I was late to work. So later they go back in time, they pick up Zar. Zar is Spock's son, and much to Spock's chagrin, he is extremely emotional. The biggest no-no about Vulcans, other than feelings, is eating meat. They can't eat meat. There's vegetarians, so it freaks Spock out later when he eats meat. This is a point where Bones, the Doctor, is talking about how Spock was dealing with this. Zar looked at the other two officers, paused for a beat, then slowly raised an eyebrow. Fascinating, he intoned. The imitation was perfect, but there was nothing good-natured about it. There is mimicry, and there is mockery, and this, thought McCoy, is definitely mockery. It wasn't lost on the Vulcan, who dropped his eyes, hastily picking up his fork. The Doctor cleared his throat. What do you think our next assignment will be, Scotty? Whatever it is, I hope it will be something with a little excitement to it. I find more thrills in my technical journals than I'm encountering on this trip. It's great to write a boring Star Trek novel that even bores its characters. Genius. Conversation continued between the chief engineer and medical officer until Scotty announced that he had a duty and departed. Spock, who was evidently finding the atmosphere uncomfortable, made another attempt. I finished reviewing your current assignment in biochemistry, Zar. Your answers were accurate for the most part. If you have your next assignment ready, I could. Without a word, the younger man got up and left the table, heading for the food processors on the other side of the gallery. Embarrassed and concerned, McCoy attempted a light tone. Never saw anyone with an appetite like that. He put Attila and all of his Huns to shame. Zar returned to the table with a large meat-filled sandwich. Deliberately, he picked it up and began eating, ignoring everything around him. When the Doctor related the incident to Kirk later that day in sickbay, the captain smiled at the point. McCoy shook his head. It wasn't funny, Jim. Zar ate it right in front of him. It was the worst insult he could give. You should have seen him. He really should have seen Spock. Really bothered him. Yeah, he got that look. And then Kirk intones something that he doesn't really care, and he has kind of a ship to run and so forth. As a kid, I really loved this because you'd think a book about like the discovery of your hero's son would be really great. Like it would be Spock has a son, so now they get to buddy up and hang out. And as a child yourself, you would think that would be fantastic. But it's a nightmare. His son is a barbarian. He doesn't have his feelings under control. And he even mocks all of Spock's cool catchphrases. And that is something you don't do to heroes as a child. You don't mock their catchphrases. So I was kind of mortified by it, but for whatever reason in the 3rd and 4th grade, reread this book numerous times. I think that there was something that Anne Crispin had touched on here kind of inadvertently, which was the idea that we have to kind of kill our heroes in order to understand what they're all about. In the TV show and the movies, Spock could be, infallible for dramatic reasons. But, if he actually had a family, it would completely screw up his whole life. Where the TV shows and movies ends, real life sort of began. And for me, with a nerd with a poor evolutionary adaptation towards bullying, facing up to the idea that sometimes your heroes or parent figures, even if they're fake aliens from space, aren't all that they've cracked up to be. Thank you.